Authors Over 50, Writing in Life's Sweetest Third. Authors Over 50's weekly podcast celebrates writers and their journeys to publication. Writing after 50 is a whole story on its own, so let's skip to life's sweetest third and talk with authors about their journey from pen to publish. Welcome. I'm Julia Daly, your host, and I invite you to listen to interviews with writers who've achieved their goal of publishing a book just later in life. We've seen award lists for under 30 or under 40, but I've yet to see lists for those who've achieved a significant milestone of their own, launching a new career and publishing their first book after the age of 50. We will hear about these authors' inspirations, struggles, strategies, and the smell of that first book. These writers' journeys inspire me because I'm one of them. My guest today is a retired attorney and Renaissance man. While he has spent most of his life as an attorney, he has also been employed in many other far more interesting jobs, such as repairing street potholes, delivering cosmetics, announcing polo matches, and inspecting apartments in Harlem, New York. These experiences have given him a unique, some say skewed, outlook on humanity in particular and life in general. Now a resident of Naples, Florida, this is his first attempt at creative writing, but not his first attempt at humor. Welcome to Authors Over 50, Alan Bianco.
Hi, Julia. Thanks for having me on.
Alan, our opening question on Authors Over 50 is always, what took you so long to write your first book?
Well, it did take a while. I suppose I never thought I could be a writer, and I never even thought about it. And then when I retired, I had time to think. I became an Uber driver. My passengers were telling me so many interesting stories about themselves in Naples that I decided to write a book.
Well, I have met the most interesting Uber drivers. We always just have the best conversations as we're going down the road.
Well, I found Uber drivers are kind of like bartenders. People tell them everything, so you learn a lot.
Well, they must, and I've been picked up by everyone from college kids earning scholarship money to musicians and elderly people like me and everybody in between.
Yeah, there's a wide variation. There are, even in Naples here, there's numerous Uber drivers of every race, creed, color, age, etc.
Yeah, that must be a great fun job to have.
All you have to do is drive safely and be nice to people. It's not hard.
That's great. Al, you love political humor so much. You even have a website dedicated to it called meaningoflifesatire.com.
I do. It's my own fun little baby. It's a little over the top, but I think it makes a point.
Well, after you interviewed all of these people as you were driving down the road, how did you proceed? Did you search for an agent, decide to choose a hybrid, a small press, or did you self-publish?
That's a very interesting question. When I finished the book, I sent it out to maybe 100 agents and maybe 20 publishers. No one was interested. Now, fortunately, I went to high school with a girl named Aphrodite Jones, who became a pretty famous writer. So I called her up on the phone and I said, Affy, how come no one's looking at me? She said, well, did you have the book edited? So I said, what's that? And she laughed. She told me books have to be edited before anyone looks at them. So I found an editor, Dave Arethra, in Chicago, and he did a wonderful job. That was my first start. I still didn't get accepted by an agent or a publisher, although I wrote to many, many more. So at David's request, I contacted a woman in Pennsylvania named Martha Bullen. She tells you everything to do to get your book published. It's not really self-publishing in that you don't pay a publisher to publish it. You do sort of everything yourself. So it is self-publishing. She said to say it was independently produced. I guess that's the term of art. So she turned me on to another person named Christy Day, who showed me how to get it on Amazon. Actually, she got it on Amazon, and at Ingram Spark, which is another publisher you should be on. And then I turned to a marketing consultant named Chava Chase Isikoff, but we call her Eva. And she taught me and showed me some of the marketing methods to use to get the book known to the public. So it was an interesting trail, an interesting journey, and I kind of feel that I kind of lucked into everything because I'm not that smart. I was more lucky than smart.
Well, I don't know about that, but it sounds like a path that a lot of us take. You know, we all want that agent. We all want one of the big five publishers to pick up our work, and you send out hundreds of query letters and wait for months and not hear from anyone, and it can be very discouraging, but that's why we have so many options these days as writers. You know, there's so many small presses, independent presses, and lots of publishers that don't require those agents anymore. So that's very helpful.
I learned an important thing, Julia. An agent receives 10% of what the author gets. And if you are published by a publishing house, you get 10% of the book cost. So the agent ends up with 1% of the sales, which I understand why they're picky.
Exactly. There's a big difference in receiving the majority of your funds coming through self-publishing than there is coming from a big five. And a lot of authors never even earn out their advances, and those advances have gotten smaller and smaller. I understand now they're only about $1,000, and if you don't earn out even $1,000, that's not selling many books, even from those large publishing houses.
Right, right. So I feel myself fortunate to be in the position I'm in.
Well, Al, what was your writing routine for that book? Did you scribble on a piece of paper in between picking up your fares, or how did that work? Are you a morning person or a night person?
Well, I'm getting old, so I'm becoming more and less a night person. But how did I do it? Well, I did two things. If I had an idea, I kept a pad in the car and I wrote it down. And I also recorded notes on a recorder. And you have to be careful because I'd end up with like 20 notes and 20 recordings, and I'd have to then condense them all at one time into a cogent tale. So I had to write as the thing happened because maybe because of my age, I forget things after a while. So I found if I wrote it down or dictated it right away, I was able to remember it and make a story.
Well, that's very interesting because, you know, actual people inspired your book because you listened to their tales as an Uber driver. That's a new one for me.
Well, it was a lot of fun and I learned a lot of things.
Well, you touched a little bit on having a publicist doing publicity. Did y'all find anything post-publication that works? How have you been promoting the book since it published?
Well, I've been on a couple websites. I've done a few podcasts. I've done a few radio shows, 5-minute interviews on morning talk shows usually. And I recently advertised in the local newspaper, and I had a tremendous positive success with that. I don't know if that's common in the industry, but I was pretty fortunate.
Yeah, if you can get into a local newspaper or on a local television station, that might lead to being in some bookstores and doing some signings. And, you know, that's always great to be in your local community since you're you're one of the Floridians down there, they can sometimes have a table that says, local authors, and people are interested in that, especially tourists.
Yeah, I've done some book signings too, and I also speak to groups like communities or sometimes old folks' homes, retirement homes, and places like that. I found that to be very much fun. It's a lot of fun because everyone down here is very friendly, and they buy some books afterwards too, so that's nice.
Have you read any specific books or gone to any seminars or writing retreats or groups that might have improved your writing journey?
I skimmed through Writer's Market, and I also what two things were very helpful to me in writing. The first was a computer thesaurus and dictionary. I don't know how Mark Twain did it without those things because they were invaluable. I also began to remember what Miss Hartel taught me in 10th grade English. And slowly I remembered everything, what verbs to use, what nouns and all. And she was a very good teacher. And I followed all of her rules except one.
Which one
You want
was
to know the
that?
one?
Yes.
She taught us never to begin a book with Once Upon a Time and never to end one with And I Lived Happily Ever After. So I did. Sorry, Elaine, my bad.
Oh, well, they say that most valuable real estate is the first few sentences that either grab the reader or don't grab the reader. So, um, once upon a time might be a good beginning.
Well, it's something people don't normally see once they're out of children's books.
Exactly. And I've noticed that our children and grandchildren don't read the fairy tales anymore. They've become, too scary, I think, for today's children.
Yeah, it's a lot different.
How long do you think it took you to write this book?
Well, I'd say it took me about 4 or 5 months to decide to write it. And then the actual writing took a little less than 2 years.
Yeah.
Now, that's composed of 4 months of writing the book and then 20 months of rewriting it and rewriting it and rewriting it and rewriting it.
Yeah. Well, they say writing is rewriting. So tell us a little bit more about that editing process that you went through with your editor.
Well, he was very straightforward. He just told me exactly what the mistakes were and how to change it. What I did when I rewrote it, however, is I did two things, and it wasn't a conscious thing at the time. Sometimes I would expand my story, and sometimes I would condense it. And so I ended up with the same size story, but it was clearer, crisper, and used the proper words. I, I didn't figure that's the way it would work, but that's the way it worked for me.
Was there anything that you edited out of the book that you found that you couldn't use? Because a lot of us, write and try to put a lot of backstory, build worlds and all of that kind of thing. Were there any characters or stories that you heard that you just couldn't put in the book?
No, I kind of put everything in the book. I told the story about where the last nudist colony was in Naples, um, about the woman who took off her clothes in my back seat to change, um, uh, 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 about just every strange thing. I put it in.
That's so great. When I'm talking to my Uber drivers around the country, I end up telling them that I'm an author, and sometimes I send them my books. So I wonder if it's just the opposite for you. Do you tell your people in the back seat that you're an author, and do you entice them to buy your books?
I do. As a matter of fact, I had a rack card made. Until I started writing, I had no idea what a rack card is, but it's a card that fits in a rack in a store usually. And I hand it out to passengers, and many passengers have bought my book.
Nice. That's very good. Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about the passages you've brought to share today and then read from your book so we can hear your tone and voice?
Well, okay. Would you like to know who inspired me? This
Yes.
is from the dedications page of my book. I'm reading it verbatim. Remember, I'm an author and an Uber driver. So to my mother, Janet A. Bianco, who taught me how to drive, and to Audrey Newbiel, Jeff Chaucer, Miss Hartel, Aesop, Dr. Trinkline, William Gaines, Jean Shepherd, Bill Shakespeare, Abby Hoffman, John of Patmos, Mario Puzo, Jerry Pournelle, Sam Clemens, Hunter S. Thompson, Edwin Estlin Cummings, and P.J. O'Rourke, who showed me how to write.
That's great. That shows us some of your favorite authors as well.
Yeah, there were some mainstream, some a little on the fringe, but it's fun. Well, here's a little bit about Naples itself. Many cities have a wealthy neighborhood of two, but because many Naples residents are, well, rich, there are numerous wealthy neighborhoods here. However, the one that takes the Grand Marnier glazed Lindsay tort, I like that analogy, is Port Royal. Port Royal outperforms in style, residence and resident attractiveness, residence and resident sophistication, and median home value almost every other American neighborhood, including Grosse Pointe, Greenwich, Laddingtown, Beverly Hills, etc., in its weight class. We have a very wealthy neighborhood down here, and it's an interesting place to live.
Oh, I didn't even know that. So that's great history there for us.
Yes, 1 out of every 11 people in Naples is a millionaire. So
Wow.
it's a good market for a bookseller.
Yes, it is. Unless you're writing about them and then they don't want to read about themselves. Well, give us another story.
Okay, this is a little about Naples, the area. Unlike Gaul, downtown Naples is divided into only two parts. The fancier, more expensive downtown is Fifth Avenue from Tamiami Trail to 3rd Street, while the slightly less fancy and very slightly less expensive downtown is 3rd Street south of 11th Avenue South. The 3rd Street downtown is historically older than the 5th Avenue downtown, but is currently populated by historically younger people. Naples has two downtowns. There is no one downtown. There's really two separate ones, and that describes that.
I've been to Florida many times, but I've never been to Naples.
Well, it used to be a secret. Unfortunately, the secret is getting out. It's really a wonderful place. Everyone here is friendly, probably because not too many New Yorkers are here. And they're very kind, they're considerate. I run in the morning. And when I started running, people would wave and say good morning. And coming from New York, I immediately thought, okay, what do they want?
That's exactly right. I know that when I walk in New York, I'm constantly nodding at people or smiling or waving or saying hello, and they look at me like I've escaped from, a mental institution.
New Yorkers are an interesting lot. They are very kind and considerate inside, but they have this crusty exterior that's almost impossible to penetrate.
I think you're right. I think if you got to know them one on one, it would be a different story. But everybody's always in a hurry and they are all moving in one large clump.
Yep, that's correct.
Do you ever Google yourself or read reviews? If so, how do you deal with the bad or the good ones?
I Google myself and I read reviews. I really haven't gotten a bad review yet. Um, I've gotten some good ones from people who I knew in the past and haven't seen in many years. I have no idea how they found out about me, but they did. It's very heartening to get good reviews, but you can't get too excited. You still have to keep your feet on the ground.
Well, reviews, I don't think people understand are the lifeblood of authors, and it means so much, especially on big e-commerce sites like Amazon. They have us live and die by the reviews on there, and so we need the numbers and we need good reviews to be able to land properly in their algorithms.
Yeah, yeah, you're right.
Do you have any other books in you?
Well, yeah, Julia, I do. I started writing a novel, and I don't know if you write novels, but writing a novel is really hard because you have to make everything up. You have to make up the weather, the shape of the doorknob, the person's shoes. It's just a challenge. I think I'm meeting, but it's much greater challenge than I thought.
It really is. Fiction is a different animal. I've interviewed a lot of people who have written memoir or who have written nonfiction books or what we call nonfiction creative or creative nonfiction. And writing fiction is just different. It's like you say, it takes a huge imagination and you have to be able to keep everything straight and you have to write down and give your characters all their characteristics. And sometimes those come from real people, and sometimes it's picking certain traits from real people and combining those with your imagination. But it is different. And I think that those of us who, even were English majors still find difficulty in writing fiction.
Yeah, I find that I get the storylines confused. So I can remember the storylines once I see them. So I write down all my storylines. I got about 12. And I have to refer to that from time to time because back here you're playing with something that happened over there. I don't know how you do it. God bless you.
Well, I think you do have to create that. I had this whiteboard in my office and I would put up all these sticky notes. I should own stock in 3M because I just would have all these different color sticky notes with all of these different characteristics of the characters and the storylines and where they were going and how they were going to intersect, and it's difficult. I mean, there are apps that you can keep up with that, but I just worked in Word and had everything else visually on my board so I could see it because sometimes you'll write about a blue-eyed blonde in the first chapter and by the last chapter she's got green eyes. You have to keep up with those little details or the readers will definitely tell you about it.
Yeah, one of the things I learned about writing is you do learn word inside and out. You have to almost use every feature they have to get what you're trying to say.
Yes. And sometimes it doesn't cooperate with me.
I had the same problem.
Well, what do you think writing success looks like to you personally, Al?
Well, it's a difficult question because I never thought of myself as a writer. So I was considered myself very successful when I sold my first book. Um, and now they're selling better and better. So I'm either on the road to success or not. So I try to keep not get too excited and to look at everything objectively. It's a success that I wrote it. I feel that writing something was a success for me. If I make a lot of money, that would be nice too. But having written it, I think, is more important for me.
I certainly agree. I think getting our books out into the world is a legacy that we're leaving in the world because they're going to outlive us and our families and our friends and people who don't know us, reach out to us and tell us about reading our book. And that's been my favorite part is, my first book was about adoption and because I'm an adopted child and just having all of those members of the adoption community reach out to me and tell me that the story affected them in one way or the other. That was real success for me.
Yeah, it's a feeling of internal satisfaction in a way.
What about your family? Did they support your career as a writer?
Yes, they do. They do. I I have seven brothers and sisters, so I was assured of at least seven sales.
Or maybe not, depending on siblings.
That's true too. Yeah.
Well, As always, our last interview question is, our writers over 50 are quite unique. Do you have advice for writers 50 and above?
Well, I don't know that I'm well versed enough to give advice, but what I would say is the hardest thing is sitting down and typing the first couple lines. Even when you're in the book, as you know, you just don't feel like doing it. You don't feel like doing it, but you got to. So you sit down, and once you type a few lines, it starts to flow. Um, in a way, writing is like you doing battle with the story. You and they are going back and forth, and you're writing this, and you have to erase this, you have to add that. It's kind of a fun battle, and it's very, very rewarding. Even if you never sell anything, just actually accomplishing the story, finishing the story, for me was a very rewarding thing.
I think that's wise advice for everyone. I think to finish is so important these days. You know, so many people start things and they don't finish them. So that in itself is quite an accomplishment. And you've led such an interesting life in New York and now in Florida. And we're just excited to say that we can count you now among our authors over 50.
Thank you very much, Julia. It's been a privilege being here.
Thank you for joining us today. Please look for Authors Over 50 every Thursday when we will have conversations with accomplished debut novelists over the age of 50. Please subscribe and share with a friend. And check out my own publication journey after 50 at www.juliadaily, that's D-A-I-L-Y, like dailynewspaper.com. Until next time, keep reading and writing. And remember, it's never too late to fulfill a dream in life's sweetest third.